Whoever came up with this whole war on drugs, I'd like to kiss him on the lips and shake his hand and buy him dinner with caviar and champagne. The war on drugs is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me, and the day they decide to end that war will be a sad one for me and all of my closest friends. If you don't believe me, ask those guys whose heads showed up in the ice chests. That was a quote from Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Lera, former head of the Sinaloa cartel. If the head of a criminal cartel is thanking you for one of your policies, it's probably a good idea to look over it. But this is the game of politics. And in the first of a 3-part series we will look over this topic. The first video will put the case for, the second video will put the case against, and because this is a channel where we like to get you to think like politicians and analyse how a policy helps them, the third video will give that perspective, but also my opinions on the subject. In these videos I'll look at legalising, not simply decriminalising drugs. So let's get started. Firstly, I think it's important to mention that legalising drugs is not some far-off hippie idea. It is supported by organisations such as the British Medical Journal and the Global Commission on Drugs Policy. In my mind, there are 4 legitimate reasons why someone would want to legalise drugs. Economic reasons, individual freedom, the adverse effects of drug policy, and hypocrisy of the current policy. Let's go through them in order. Economic reasons. This is possibly the most cited reason, but if all substances were legal, they could be taxed and regulated. A 2013 Euronews article put the size of the UK drug market at between 6.3 billion euros and 7.9 billion euros. That's between 5.64 billion pounds and 7.08 billion pounds. Using napkin maths and taking a conservative estimate about the amount of tax revenue you could collect, let's say 5%, which is still between 282 million pounds and 395 million pounds. However, this doesn't include the potential increase in the size of the economy. A completely new industry would spring up, creating tens of thousands of jobs, with hundreds of new businesses, and that increased circulation would be in the formal economy where the taxman can get at it. Although this would probably be less money than would be saved from stopping drug trafficking. The National Crime Agency says, the government's organised crime strategy sets out that drug trafficking to the UK costs an estimated £10.7 billion per year. Now, some of that money would still be used for border control, and some of it would probably need to go to public health campaigns on how to use the drugs in the safest way possible, but the rest would have a large impact on the UK's finances, especially now because we have a budget deficit. I can only speak for the UK, but I assume it would have a pretty big impact for other countries as well. Individual freedom. This is possibly the most subjective point because it's based on personal ideology, but the argument goes like this. If I am, according to my government, old enough to make decisions on everything from buying alcohol and cigarettes, to taking out a loan, to owning a house, whether those be good or bad decisions, I should have the ability to choose what substances I put in my body. This is in essence a rejection of paternalism, a rejection of the idea that one person has the right to say to another person what they can do with their body, simply because they feel it may be harmful for the person. For example, we can go to a store and buy any number of things that are harmful for us. For example, unhealthy food, and then overeat to the extent that we kill ourselves. Does that mean unhealthy food should be illegal? No, of course not. What about skydiving or whitewater rafting? Both very dangerous activities. Should we ban them as well? No, of course not. People on the libertarian side of the political spectrum generally view drug criminalisation as an infringement on personal liberty, just like stopping somebody from doing a dangerous sport would be. Adverse effects of drug policy. People advocating for legalising drugs have argued that our current drug policy simply hasn't worked at stopping people from using drugs, while also stigmatising those users. For example, according to a 2012 edition of the UK Drug Situation Report, compiled by the Department of Health, throughout England and Wales in 2011 to 2012, 75% of people between the age of 16 and 59 said it was easy to obtain drugs. Even in prison, an environment completely controlled by the government, they cannot stop drugs from getting in or being used. According to the Ministry of Justice, prison officers confiscated 225 kilograms of drugs in 1 year in England and Wales. One of the major effects of the drug war has been that the drug cartels and gangs have in a sense been given the opportunity to make billions. over the years simply because they are the only suppliers of the drugs. Whereas if there was a legal market, there would be competition from real, legal, tax-paying businesses. For example, a Mexican grower told NPR News in December 2014, 2 or 3 years ago a kilogram of marijuana was worth $60 to $90, but now we're paying $30 to $40 a kilo. It's a big difference. If the US continues to legalize pot, they'll run us into the ground. Legalization would drastically reduce drug gangs' revenue within a very short time frame. Now, of course, drug gangs won't take this lying down. They'll move into different areas, but the point is, those areas are not as profitable. Along with the drugs gangs and cartels comes a lot of violence, costing many lives. For example, all you need to do is look at the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. Going back to the quote I said at the start, it is also important to mention the racially charged motive of the drug war. John L. Rickman said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Still, to this day, especially in America, black and other minority communities are being targeted, with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, calling the drugs war the new Jim Crow. Hypocrisy of our current system. Many people argue that our policies around drugs are also very hypocritical, because they ignore the massive amounts of harm that legal drugs like tobacco and alcohol inflict on society. Globally, harmful use of alcohol causes approximately 3.3 million deaths every year, or 5.9% of all deaths, according to the World Health Organization. Also, according to the World Health Organization, tobacco kills over 7 million people a year, whereas an illegal drug, like cannabis, kills 0. It has never been recorded to kill a single person. Now, no one is saying that these substances have no harms or adverse effects, and there are, without question, illegal drugs that are more harmful than tobacco or alcohol. But there seems to be some hypocrisy between what is legal and what is illegal. The hypocrisy is also shown by the fact many leaders have admitted to using these drugs. I've left a link to a video in the description that shows many politicians saying that they've done drugs. But notable examples include David Cameron, George Bush, Barack Obama, Boris Johnson, and those are the major arguments for legalizing drugs. Be sure to watch the 2 remaining videos in the series. I'll put a link on screen for the second video, where I go over the arguments against legalization of all drugs, as well as a link to one of my previous videos. If I've provided any value whatsoever to you today, please consider subscribing. This has been The Game of Politics, and thank you for watching.